Welcome back to the Bob Davis Podcast YouTube channel. We are freezing our ass in Big Bear, which is why we have the fire. Thanks to my brother-in-law, Mike, and his wife, Amy, we have a beautiful place to mooch talk. They're inside. They don't want to be on camera, so I am out here at Big Bear. And no, I'm not really freezing my ass in Big Bear, but it's a great title, right? And we have this gas fire here. We're sitting on the deck. You can sort of hear that. Big Bear Lake, California, and Big Bear City, California. Big Bear City has a little bit more of the old school mountainy kind of California flavor. Big Bear Lake is more of a resort. There's a ski resort here, a lot of restaurants, a lot of places to go. And it is a big change from the desert, certainly, and it's a big change from Los Angeles. So I'm going to talk about getting up here, and I'm going to talk about the climate a little bit, and really the elevation. That's kind of what it's all about. And this is the channel where I talk about my recent audio podcasts, and this is a podcast as well, but it's it is a video version of the podcast. And just so you know, I don't do the same content. So this isn't the podcast I recorded for audio. This is the podcast that I'm recording for YouTube. And a lot of people just repurpose audio or video for podcasts. I don't do that because I think the platforms are different, blah, 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 blah. I don't need to get into that. Big Bear is about 7,500 feet. So there's a considerable climate difference between Los Angeles and the suburbs of around, which all one big suburb, but basically Anaheim, Fullerton, wherever you are in LA, from this elevation, which is 7,500. If you've been in the Southwest at all, you know that elevation, especially in December, can make a gigantic difference in your experience because it can be much colder. I spent Christmas, I was telling these guys earlier, I spent Christmas 2020 near Portal, New Mexico / Arizona, at about 8,000 feet. And I didn't understand that, altitude and cold has a difference. And I literally froze my feet off in that campground. I was only there for Christmas Eve, and then I came down on Christmas Eve and went, someplace else. Big difference in the desert, even in December, which is the coldest month, generally speaking, if you're at Joshua Tree or you're even further down in Quartzsite or Yuma or at sea level, it's much warmer. Also, Death Valley is much warmer than Big Bear. But this is a ski area. This is pines and skiing and mountain, and it's a huge difference from what went on down in LA. So I want to talk about getting here and the experience, and I'm going to do something that I do not do in these videos. I started this out as kind of a video vlog, a video blog thing, a vlog, so to speak. Old school, just me talking in front of the camera. And I've always said, when I got a new computer, I'll maybe start working on doing some editing and do a little bit more production for these videos than I did before. So what I'm going to do in this one is, as I talk about a few things, I didn't go nuts. I shot some B-roll so that I can throw some of these shots over me. You'll hear me talking, but you'll see what I'm talking about. So getting up here, let me tell you about traffic in LA. Everybody in Los Angeles and everybody who's not from Los Angeles talks about traffic in LA. I generally have not found it terrible. Obviously, if you're doing the workaday thing Monday through Friday, you can run into these traffic jams, which are just bleeders. But I came up here because I could not get an oil change in the Los Angeles area. They didn't want to work on this truck, the mobile podcast command truck. So as you can see, I'm in traffic, and it was actually pretty good, 65, 70 all the way till we got to Riverside, and then we kind of encountered a little bit of traffic, and then that cleared out. To get here, you go,
There's a slowdown ahead.
The 15 to 330, and then you take 330 to 18, and 18 comes up to Big Bear from down there, and it's a hairpin situation. But the traffic jam's not that bad. As I was getting ready to leave, I came home. I went to about 4 places to get an oil change, came back and said to Mike, I'm going up to Big Bear. I decided to make, sort of call in an audible. I made a call up here, and a guy goes, well, hell yeah, bring it up. We don't have a problem with a 450 diesel, 7.3 diesel oil change. Bring it up. So I brought it up, And what has happened since is this it was a one-day thing. It turned into a 4-day thing because I had to get a serpentine belt. We ordered the wrong belt, so now we got to get the other belt, and then I got a nail in my tire. So we got a lot of things we got to take care of. So I'll be here for at least another 24 hours. It's Sunday as I record this, and it's just beautiful up here. It's great. So as you come up this winding road, you get to some of these overlooks at about 7,500 feet, and it is really breathtaking. So some of these overlooks are just fantastic and incredible, and I really had a good time driving up. Even this big old truck was fine on the road coming up and going through all the hairpin turns and everything else. So Big Bear is great. And then coming into Big Bear is where I have the truck in for its oil change. And they're going to do the oil change, and they're also going to get me a serpentine belt, and then we're going to get this. The nail in the tire isn't that bad, but it's. I have a feeling it's not a very deep nail, but we don't want to take it out because we're afraid that the tire at that point is going to deflate, and So they have somebody that will come and look at the tire and patch it if they can. So that's the challenge today with Big Bear, and this is downtown Big Bear. It's beautiful. Now, where I am today is up here a little bit further out on a sort of a jetty, if you'd call it, whatever you want, a promenade or whatever it is, so you can sort of see the lake and you can see one of the mountains coming in. Did a little research on the history of Big Bear. It's kind of interesting. It kind of got its start during the years right before the gold rush. And there was a miner, prospector, whatever you want to call him, who came up here and came into this valley. At that time, that lake wasn't here. It was just a stream. A species of grizzly that was up in this area. He came up here chasing a bear and then decided he was going to stay here. To make a long story short, over the course of a few years, they discovered gold in Central California, and then, of course, they also, he decided to pan for gold, because that's what he did, and there was quite a lot of gold in the stream. So then this also brought up gold miners, and then they dammed it up, and the beginning of the lake occurred. I don't know when they built the actual dam up here, which is not too far from here, and then that's sort of the genesis of Big Bear Lake. Big Bear City is just a couple miles down the road, and Big Bear City is more of a mountain town. So it grew through the gold rush era and the mining and everything else, and I'm sure lumber and all the things that they used to do in those days. Of course, before white men got here, there were many different Indian tribes, and of course that had some friction as well. I'm not getting into that in this video, but some of those people's descendants are still here, which is pretty cool. And so it's just a great place with a lot of history. And of course, California history. What's interesting to me about the West in general is that it didn't develop until really the 1920s. You see this even in West Texas. When you go to West Texas, you see this. You see these towns that were built in the 1920s because the railroads, the Intercontinental Railroad, the Pacific connection to the Atlantic, let's say, railroads developed in fits and starts. And so we didn't have an Intercontinental Railroad until Continental Railroad rather, until after the Civil War, somewhere around the Civil War era, the 1860s. So the railroad is really what developed the West. Certainly there were mountain men and there were, settlers and all of that came, but people really started to come with the railroads, and then the railroad towns started to develop. And so you see all over the Southwest, you see these developments. Arizona was the last state admitted to the Union in, I think, 1912. And California was admitted to the Union rather quickly in 46 or something, or 42 or something like that, during the midst of the Mexican-American War, 44, 45, because both Russia and England and France had designs on the West Coast, and John Fremont came out here and just was here and just declared this a state without even talking to anyone, and so there was a big rush on. But when they found gold here, then a lot of people came in. But you get this development here that didn't happen until really the 20th century. So 1920, 1910, the development really kicked in right around there in all through the West, largely because of the railroads. And then because of the interstates, you had another sort of gulp of development in the 1950s and then on through the 80s. We all know the story of Los Angeles. Being in Los Angeles this week, I had to say to myself, this must have been a paradise in the 1940s and 50s. I mean, it was a dusty desert town prior to the water development and all these different pieces that go into the history of the West. Water, resources, mining, and all these things. And when you talk about them, many people have super negative reactions. So they want to, take exception with what you're saying. I don't have a side. I'm just saying this is part of the history of the development of California in particular, but the West in general. Wherever you are, you see this struggle with property and natives and railroads and mining and damming up lakes and controlling the water and all those things, and fencing versus open ranging and all these issues, which are just really kind of foreign to the history of the eastern part of the United States. And I really kind of feel that the West, as it developed, it was almost a second history of the United States. And in many ways, it is the history of the United States, because from the get-go, there were issues with defining states, which states, where, what was the geography, how were we going to require, what was the population, who was going to run them, how were the government structures going to work. Then we had the Revolution and the Constitution, and so they figured that out. And then there were all these corporate issues with who owns the land, how are we going to get people out there, and people just came, whether anybody asked them to come or not. So the government was really behind the trend in terms of people moving out west. And as it became easier and easier, then more and more people came. And I know that's a really tough, difficult spot, because there's an old west. There's an even older west, obviously, where there was no white people to speak of at all. And there was an even older West where even the Native Americans were immigrants going way back. So there's a really varied, we can't forget the Spanish, so there's a very varied history of this place, and I just love reading about it. And every time you come to a place like Big Bear, and I'm hacking it up terrible because I don't have my notes in front of me from the things that I've read, but generally speaking, give or take, that's kind of part of the history of this part of the world. And then you get into these towns like this, and every one of these towns has some kind of interesting history, whether it's Pecos, Texas, or Big Bear, California, or even Los Angeles, and especially San Francisco and all the places on up the Pacific Coast Highway. So contrary to what I did the last few years, where I just stayed in one spot in Arizona, I have decided to do some low and slow travel. And it's really neat because these places are not very far apart from each other. Joshua Tree is about 100 miles from Los Angeles, and then this is about 100 miles from Los Angeles, getting up here. And when you see a vista from the pine trees along 18 coming up to Big Bear, you really realize why one of the reasons they call it the Golden State. Of course, they call it the Golden State because of gold in particular, but to me, it's also the Golden State because of the light and the sun. Is just special. There's something about California that you just don't get it anywhere else. And I love Arizona, and I love New Mexico. I mean, I call New Mexico American Tibet. New Mexico is amazing. I love Colorado, and I love Utah, and all these states are amazing because of the vistas and the mountains and the beaches and all the things that are part of it. But California is special. So I'm enjoying going to these places. So my next step is going to be to the Mojave National Monument on the recommendations of Ranger Lori from up in Grand Canyon I met last fall. And I'm kind of jumping around a bit, but she said you should go to Mojave National Monument. So I'm going to go up there. There's also a bunch of dry lake beds up there, and BLM structures as well. Land, BLM land up there. And then I'm going to go to Death Valley. Now, why am I going in this particular direction? Well, it involves something called a catalytic heater. I have a Heat Buddy heater for the truck, and you can't leave it on because, number one, it puts out a massive amount of BTUs, and secondly, it is you hear that plane. I wonder if that's my nephew, because if you listen to the podcast, you're going to hear a flyover. He has a plane, and he's in the Navy, and he has this little experimental plane. He's been flying it around. I don't think he's still here, but that might be him. I don't know. Anyway, you'll hear the audio of the flyby. He did a flyby, came right down, below, basically right on the lakefront. It was pretty cool. And it's just a little experimental plane, no big deal. Anyway, where was I? I'm talking about low and slow travel and where I'm headed next. Oh, yeah. So I want to get a catalytic heater for the truck. Now, the catalytic heater just basically has a chemical reaction between the propane and the heat surface, so there's no flame like this. Now, when you're indoor with any kind of a flame gas heater, it puts out a condensate kind of vapor, which gets into your airways, and it's very irritating, and I got to do something about it. You can't leave it on all night. Well, come to find out that in California, you cannot buy a catalytic heater. You can't buy one of those Camco catalytic heaters. You can't buy it at a camping store. You can't even order it online. I thought I'd be clever and order it from Amazon and have it sent to my mailbox up in Wisconsin. Then they could put it in a box that you can't tell what it is, and then they would email that. They would not email. They would mail that to me here in LA or wherever. Well, you can't do that either, because it knows you're in California when you try to order, and you can't get it. So I figured out that I can call Camping World. Not a fan of Camping World, but I can call Camping World, and I can get them to order it, and then I can pick up the catalytic. I'm getting the little Camco catalytic heater, and I'm going to go to Camping World in Las Vegas. This is not a commercial, because if it was, they would have sent it to me already. So I'm not doing a commercial for them. I'm just telling you what I'm going to do and why I am headed in that direction. So Mojave, Death Valley, and then I'll go on into Nevada, and hopefully stop at the Camping World and get myself a little catalytic heater so I can deal with it. Why do I say that? Well, out here, December's the worst month. December can be very cold and sometimes rainy. And so our experience in Quartzsite was always December was the best month. The worst month of winter. Compared to up north, it's not a problem at all. But when you get used to living in 120 degree or 90 degree, whatever, sunshine deserts, you get acclimated to that heat and cold. 40 degrees is cold. So December's the worst month. Then the days start getting longer, and by the middle of January, the weather gets much better. February down in this area, obviously not when we're up at this high because it's snowing, but down around LA and in the deserts, February is beautiful. And then along comes March, and by March or April, I'll probably start heading up to northern reaches of California, and then on up into Oregon and Washington, eventually heading back to Wisconsin, hopefully a little bit later. I got up there last year in May. I don't want to spend that much time up there, so I'll probably get there mid-June. And by the way, in mid-May in Wisconsin, it's still pretty cold, so I don't want to be cold. The idea is endless summer. So this is about as cold as I want to be, and I'm joking because I'm really not cold. It's very pleasant. The sun is beautiful, as you can see, and you get outside. Most of the people here have things like this little fire, or they have kind of heat out on their decks, or they have hot tubs or whatever. It's wonderful. I don't have a hot tub in Mobile Podcast Command, but the plan is there's actually a hot spring up there somewhere. So I'm going to check out the hot spring. There's a little hot spring north of Mojave as you go into Death Valley someplace. So I'm going to stop and see if I can check that out. But basically, I would say that the low and slow travel in California is working out. I'm talking a lot about California because I'm in California. And I don't want people to think, oh, this guy is just all promoting California. That's not the intention. But I'm taking my time coming through these places so I can talk. And I filled up at the Indian Reservation for $3.89 for diesel too, just outside of it was in Coachella actually, and I haven't used all that gas. I still have half a tank of gas from that refuel, which was only about half a tank in Coachella. And I'm on the way up here, and I've actually, that's a trip to LA, then it's up here, and I still have half a tank, and I've been driving around Big Bear up and down. And I came here, as I said, because nobody would do my oil change in Los Angeles, and they were very nice to do the oil change here. So Big Bear is great. It's one of my favorite places, and I talk a lot about places that I could live. I get into a house, my eyes start watering, I start coughing. I'm almost allergic to being in a house. So for me, traveling and going from place to place is really what makes me happy. And so I'm really trying to hold it down and just spend some time in a state. As I did a couple years ago during COVID, I didn't want to go all the way back to Wisconsin, so I stayed up in Idaho and Utah. And it was also mechanical. The issues were mechanical. I was trying to get tires and do all this stuff. And so I went up there and I spent a lot of time camping around Boise and around some, I guess it was Salt Lake, but it might have been the other town. The other town up there. I don't know I didn't even know where I was, but I had a great time. And also Colorado, I went to Fort Collins and visited a friend in Fort Collins. And as you go north out of Fort Collins, there's a bunch of campgrounds up there as you go on up to about 10,000 feet, and they are beautiful. So I had a great time in Colorado and a great time in Utah and Idaho last year or 2 years ago. And it was 2 years ago. Because of COVID, I didn't want to go all the way home. So I'm not just talking about hot footing it on the freeways from one place to another. We're still doing the back road thing. And it really is fun and it's feeling great. And I am in a great mood. And this is one more thing I want to say is that you can't get over the vibe that comes from just travel, just going from place to place. And I think as nomads, we kind of make it hard sometimes. And maybe we want to. Maybe we want the challenge and we make it difficult. But I'm really dedicating myself to just, very low friction travel. Let's go with the flow. We're not going to make a big deal out of stuff. A lot of people, they couldn't get their car serviced or their truck serviced in Los Angeles. They'd be like, I'm in Los Angeles. Why can't I? This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. And get upset and fight it. And I just said, I'm going to Big Bear anyway this weekend. I may as well just see if I can get my oil change up in Big Bear. And it worked out beautifully. So it's just taking it easy and letting things kind of unfold is making me feel a lot better. And I'm still mobile. I'm not in just one place. I can still be mobile and go to different places. And it's had a huge effect on my psyche. I don't get depressed. What's interesting about me is I don't get depressed so much, but I will get sick. I will get physically sick as opposed to getting depressed. I find that fascinating, that there's almost a physical depression, but it isn't. I don't feel that I'm mentally depressed. So I really don't feel like I get depressed, but I'll get uncomfortable. The difference is that I will do something about it. I'm not just going to sit there and be, overwhelmed. And I think the physical part of it comes from just being empathic. As an empath, you really pick up energy, and maybe that's one of the reasons that I want to be moving, because as an empath, it's easier for me to be by myself and to be in solitude, to consider and process, and then rejoin the world and spend some time with people. Spending time with family has been great, really been great for me, and I really appreciate people allowing me to mooch talk both here in Big Bear and also down in Fullerton. And now we're getting back on the road, and we're going to get ourselves a catalytic heater, and it will be life changing, because you can leave the heater on, and let me tell you, I'm hooked up to electricity, so I have an electric heater and I have an electric blanket. I can't run the electric blanket all night because it's not a 12-volt blanket. We've talked about that. Somebody messaged me, left a note on the channel, when I was talking about my electric blanket. Being able to have the electric blanket on all night and also run the electric heat when it's 30 degrees, which it has been the last few nights, is just fantastic. So I'm just saying I'm going to try to continue that by just getting my little catalytic heater, and then I can run that most of the night, keep the truck warm, and I can turn the electric blanket on for like 5 minutes, which heats it up. And then I have the sleeping bag, and I have a big old cowhide blanket, and I have another fleece-lined blanket. So between all the blankets and everything else, loaded up, and maybe a little 5-minute run with the electric blanket on 6, I don't use up enough electricity, then that's fine. But if I can have the electric heater, if I can have the catalytic heater run for longer periods of time, then I think it's going to make a huge difference in just terms of comfort when it's cold. But I'm heading to Death Valley, where it's like 75 during the day and 50 at night. So that's going to feel like pure luxury to me. All right, I've gone on long enough. I'm going to sit here by the fire and enjoy Big Bear and hopefully not freeze my ass. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing to the Bob Davis Podcast YouTube channel. I really appreciate the subscriptions and views and likes, blah, 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 blah. And thank you for subscribing to the Bob Davis Podcast at Apple Podcasts and the different sources, Spotify. It's also on iHeart. You can get it wherever you usually get your podcasts. So check it out, thebobdavispodcasts.com, or here on the YouTube channel at the Bob Davis Podcasts. Bye-bye.